I'd like to welcome Louise Homfrey to our program. Good evening, Louise.
Good evening, John, and thank you very much indeed for having me at your place. Perhaps I should do as I used to do when I opened at 3DB every morning and say, good morning, Mr. Ferguson, because in all the days of Monty Blandford, whose name was Frank and whom I always called Frank, I never once said good morning, Monty. It was always good morning, Mr. Blandford.
Louise, you were saying that you have enjoyed 32 years in radio. Where did you start?
I started in 1926
Yes.
to sing for 2BL.
Yes.
Then I went to 2SC. Then I went to 2UW, which was my first commercial venture in 1930. And I gave away the women's session at 3DB in 1953 and kept on with a session called Problem Corner for another 5 years, so that I left radio finally in 1958.
Well, on that first night when you phoned in, and I explained to you, yes, that I knew of you.
Yes, I thought to myself, good heavens above, the man must be 100 to remember.
Now, it's surprising. We had quite a few listeners phone in and said, oh, yes, we remember Louise.
Dude, that's so, that's fine. Of course, a funny thing happened. I was away fishing. I'm a very ardent fisherman. And I was away fishing when Darren Hinch, somebody sent him in an old listener in, and he read an article about a woman called Louise, and did anybody know her, or was she still about, and so forth. And several people phoned in, including one who said, I must be dead, I must be well over 80. And this was when I was about 84. And one of my neighbours couldn't stand that, because she and I were cobbers, and she rang up and she said that she's nothing like dead. She's very much alive and very chipper, and she's away. And, well, where is she? Oh, she's interstate. Can you tell us how we get on to her? She said, I don't know where she is. I don't keep tab on her like that. But she'll be back in a fortnight. So please get her to ring me up. So I rang Darren Hinch when I came back, and I talked to him a bit, but it was just about a minute and a half before the news, so it was very short, and I've forgotten what I said. But it gave me a kick, you know. It is nice to know that people do remember, even if they were kids. And of course, one of the greatest compliments that was ever paid to me was told me by one of my correspondents at 3DB, that she always put her baby down by the radio to go to sleep, because my voice sent her to sleep.
I notice on your recordings you're called the Lady Baritone, or the Whispering Lady Baritone. Apart from your distinctive voice, was there any other reason for this?
When I first went into radio, I went down to, I'd been away, I'd been to Canada and back as a member of a ship's company, and I came back and I had no job, and this new radio thing was on, so people sang and so forth, and I'd built myself my own loose coupled radio set, because I was handy with my hands and mechanical sense in those days, and with a bit of assistance I'd built my own. And so I went down and saw them, two people, George Saunders and Billy Dick, at 2BL. Billy Dick was a beautiful pianist, and I sang for them. And they, it was a time when Jack Smith was very, very popular.
Whispering baritone.
Yes, and so they decided that I would be the whispering lady baritone, if you please. And they offered a picture of me as a prize for whoever could give the nearest description. Well, of course, the descriptions came in and I read them, and you've no idea how funny they were. But one came in which was so right that I think it must have been one of my friends who knew what I'd done. However, the end result was that the competition never came off. Nobody got anything, I think, out of it. It just lapsed. But I was then went to the Tivoli to do an audition, and got the usual, "Don't ring us, we'll ring you, thank you very much." And a man came as I was leaving the stage and put a card into my hand. It was Oswald Anderson of 2FC. He said, "Come round and see me, William." So I did. And I went round and saw him, and then began to sing more regularly at 2FC. And in those days, you dressed in an evening frock, and the announcers were all in dinner jackets. Nobody saw anybody. There were no audiences. And nevertheless, this very definite formality was carried on, and I did quite a bit of stuff at 2FC, including a stand-in for the children's session when Uncle something or other went on holiday, which was not a success, and I never touched children's stuff again.
Louise, I'm sure our listeners would like to hear you sing one of your songs from back in 1928. Would you be kind enough to announce it?
Thank you, John. We will now listen to me singing My Blue Heaven with, I think, an orchestra of 3 pieces.
Back to the shelter of each little nest they love. Nightshades falling, lovebirds calling. What makes the world go round? Nothing but love. When whippoorwills call and evening is nigh, I hurry to turn to the right, a little white light will lead you to my blue heaven. You'll see a smiling face, a fireplace, a cozy room, a little nest that's nestled where the roses bloom. Just Molly and me, and baby makes 3. We're happy in my blue heaven. When whippoorwills call and the long shadows fall, and evening is nigh with the moon in the sky, I hurry to my blue heaven. A turn to the right, a little white light will lead you to my blue heaven. Just Molly and me, and baby makes 3. We're happy in my blue heaven.
Your voice would be known to many thousands of listeners of 3DB and 3AW.
Yes, and 3UZ.
And 3UZ.
You see, when I came down here from Sydney, nobody wanted a bar off me.
Why?
Well, they had their own staffs, and they didn't want this woman from Sydney. She had a funny voice anyway.
Oh, it's a rather deep voice, but it's quite a pleasant voice.
Well, I thought so.
And obviously 3UZ, 3DB and 3AW similarly thought so.
Yes, so I freelanced, you see. I went to see if I could get a job because I'd come down here from 2UW and got flu as soon as I arrived in the place. I spent 10 days in bed, and I'd had a very tiring time at 2UW in the previous year, and I wrote and asked if I could have another week at my own expense. And the boss, who was a friend, sent back a long lettergram telling me all the things that had been arranged, and finished it up with, "Suggest you return, otherwise must replace." I was as mad as a hornet.
I can just imagine.
So I waited until Saturday, and I just sent back a telegram, "Replace Homfrey." And then that started a fuss. He began accusing AW of wooing me away. But until I went and got my own sponsor and my own money, nobody wanted a bar of me. However, they were very grateful because it was just after AW had begun, and they were very happy to have me go out and get all the money that was necessary. And so I stayed at AW for some years. And then the mutual store wanted an advertiser for themselves, and they wanted it at 3DB. And off I went to 3DB with a half-hour session in the mutual, for the mutual store, at 10 in the morning. Then from that, they decided they'd have an AW session at 10:30 at night. So I had a nice 12-hour day with the mutual store, and from that it just grew until I was doing all sorts of things and being paid for everything, not as I'd been at 2UW, working all round the clock if necessary for £3 a week.
Having briefly covered your years with 3AW, could you tell the listeners of the involvement you had with 3DB?
Iris Turnbull, who was doing 3DB's women's session, decided that she'd like to go and have a year off at the coronation. And she did so, and they asked me to take over from her just as a substitute for months that she was away. But she had a shipboard romance on the way back, and it was obviously a serious one, because she decided she wasn't going to take over the session. She was going to get married to an apple orchardist from Tasmania, and off she went. And I stayed as a freelance, as a just temporary hand sort of thing, not on the staff, but I didn't have to get my own advertising for 3DB. They did, but I still reserved the right to refuse, because that had been the training I'd had at 2UW, where I was eternally indebted to the studio manager of the time, John Prentice, for his advice to me when I first went into commercial radio. John said to me, "Now this is, as you're starting, this is my first piece of advice. You are not addressing millions of people. You're a guest in somebody's house, and they can throw you out just with the flick of a switch. Behave yourself as you would if you were a guest in somebody's house, which was quite easy for me to do because I am naturally a courteous person. Also, he said, don't start off on the wrong foot, because if you give yourself a false position, the microphone is the most betraying thing in the world. It opens you to whoever listens to you, and sometime something will happen to disconcert you, and if you're on a false foot, you'll fall flat on your face, and it'll take you a hell of a long time to pick it up. So I just went ahead.
I have this record titled They All Fall in Love, composed by Cole Porter and recorded by Lew Swanson, accompanied by Ted Foster and his guitar, which I believe you know something about.
Yes, I don't know why it was, but Parlophone decided that they might make a change, whether the sales of the records weren't going or anything like that. I suppose that was the reason. But they said, sing this one, and we'll issue it as Lew Swanson.
Each year when spring, quite uninvited, gives a garden party to the world united, everyone gets so excited, they don't know what they're thinking of. Folks who've spent the winter freezing with the balmy breeze and simply lose their reason, they know it's the open season for falling in love. The young fall, the old fall, the red-hot mamas and the cold fall, from the lily white to the black as night, they all fall in love. The fools fall, the wise fall, the wets, the sprinkled and the dries fall, from the men who drink to the men who wink, they all fall in love. You may believe your broker is very mediocre at playing with your stocks and bonds. At business he may blunder, and yet he's a perfect wonder when he plays with blondes. Old maids who object fall, old men you never would suspect fall, even babies who can hardly crawl fall, 'cause they all fall in love. The wags fall, the boobs fall, the gold brick cellars and the roofs fall, from the doves of peace to the wildest geese, they all fall in love. The good very oft fall, little tiny bookworms up on shelves fall, the early worms to the latest germs, they all fall in love. Fall, and men like Lindbergh who can fly fall, even wrestlers much too cute to fall, 'cause they all fall in love.
I understand that you are hosting a women's program and giving helpful household hints back in the early days before anyone even heard of Martha Gardner. Is that correct?
Well, Martha Gardner came into my session, made her not her debut. She'd been on with John Stewart on DB in a short session, and then the boss asked me to find her something to do, because she was his wife, you see, and she was pretty fidgety. She was going through a fairly trying time. They'd had a tragic loss of their only daughter, and he said to her, "Can you find Zoe something to do?" So I said, "Well, she's a jolly good gardener. Why not give her a gardening session?" So that was all right. She came in to me to do a gardening session, which she did for quite some time. And I knew she couldn't come in as Zoe Worrell. So I thought I had to think of a name for her. And I thought, well, gardener's all right, because she's going to do the gardening session. Then I thought, well, what about a Christian name? And I thought, and I suddenly remembered the story, the Bible story of Martha and Mary, where Mary sat at Jesus' feet listening to his talking, while Martha got on with the housekeeping and the chores and so forth. And Zoe Worrell was a tremendously fine social asset to Dave. She had a beautiful house, a lovely garden. She was an exquisite hostess. So I thought, oh, okay, she's the practical woman. Let's call her Martha. So Martha Gardner she became, and went on to her own tremendous successes thereafter.
Louise, do you find many people still remember you from your early days in Wireless?
I was in the supermarket one day, and there was a young girl beside me waiting after me, and I only had a few things, and she had a great load of stuff. She had a baby on her hip, and it was very awkward. So I said to her, "Here, get in ahead of me and get your stuff out as quickly as possible." And with that, I stepped out of the line and put her in. And as I did so, a pair of pink arms went round me, and I got a smacking great kiss on the cheek, and a woman's voice said, "I know that voice anywhere," and was off like a shot. I never even saw her face, but I can tell you it lifted the old lady's heart up very considerably all that day. I had a grand time, because it is great when you're in your late 80s, as I am, to be remembered by people. And the other morning, one of the neighbours came round. She said, "Is your name Louise?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Oh, I heard you singing last night, and on 3CR, you were singing 'Take Your Finger Out of Your Mouth.' I'd completely forgotten I'd ever made the thing." And she was very complimentary, and that gave me another lift for another day. So you see, it's quite all right to be going on living, even if I am in my 89th year, but I have no ambition to get a telegram from the Queen. Thank you very much. Well, John wants me to now sing a couple more. So you can have Hugs and Kisses, and then follow that up by Carol Lee. And I'd like to sing that one for a very good friend of mine whom I've never seen, who's a voice on the telephone, and who is my twin, and one or other of us rings the other up on our birthdays. We are exactly the same age, and that's Mary H., and I don't know where she lives, but we ring each other up once a year and have done for many, many years. So, Mary, here it is for you, Carol Lee.
Rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief, doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, are all a wild goose chase. You'll see them every place, chasing rainbows constantly. Never did appeal to me, those things I'll never miss. For all I want is this, hugs and kisses. witches I know have their charms, but my heart itches to be in your arms. Oh, hugs and kisses from somebody who lingers near me to cuddle and coo. My idea of bliss is a cottage for two, and hugs and kisses from someone like you. I don't want diamonds, I don't want pearls, I don't want a lot of things like other girls. I don't want the moonlight and the stars above. They don't mean a thing to me, because I just want hugs and a heap of flaming kisses from a wonderful boy like you. I'll say undoubtedly that this is like all my dearest dreams coming true. Fame and fortune, gold and lots of riches, without a doubt have many charms. But my warm and tender heart just itches to live and die within your loving arms.
been marvellous to go back, even with the awful gaps that there are in my memories. I've had a marvellous time, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, and I just hope the listeners have had half as good a time as I've had.
I'm sure they have, Louise, and thanks very, very much for this interview.
My great pleasure. Goodbye, and God bless you all.